The blood on her dress had dried to a rusty brown by the time Deanna Kellerman stumbled into the clearing where the barn stood like a sanctuary against the Oklahoma sky. And she knew if she stopped running now, he would kill her this time. Her bare feet left crimson prints in the dust of the July heat, cut open from miles of desperate flight through scrubland and over rocks sharp as her husband's fists. The year was 1893, and women like her had nowhere to go, no law that would protect them, no safe house waiting with open doors. She had only the clothes on her back, terror singing through her veins, and the fading hope that distance might mean survival. The barn belonged to a ranch on the outskirts of Guthrie, Oklahoma, a sprawling property she had noticed once from the wagon when Thomas had driven her to town for supplies, back when he still pretended to be the man who had courted her 3 years ago. She had remembered it because of the horses in the pasture, beautiful creatures that looked free in a way she had not felt since her wedding day. Now she pressed herself against the weathered wood of the barn door, gasping for breath that would not come, listening for the sound of hoofbeats that haunted her like a heartbeat. The door creaked open behind her and she spun, a scream caught in her throat, ready to beg or fight or simply fall to her knees and accept whatever came next. Instead, she found herself staring up at a man with sun-weathered skin and eyes the color of creek water in spring. He was tall, broad across the shoulders in the way of men who worked with their hands, wearing dusty work clothes and a hat pushed back on dark hair. He looked at her torn dress, her bleeding feet, her split lip, and something shifted in his expression that made her want to weep. "Please," she whispered, though she did not know what she was asking for. Mercy, maybe, or just another minute of breathing. He glanced past her toward the road, then back to her face and made his decision in the space of a heartbeat. "Come with me." His voice was low, urgent, and he reached for her arm with surprising gentleness. She flinched anyway, could not help it, and saw him notice. He pulled his hand back, held it up to show he meant no harm. "I will not hurt you, madam, but if someone is following you, we need to get you hidden. Now." Deanna nodded because words had abandoned her, and she followed him into the dim coolness of the barn. It smelled of hay and horses and leather, clean, honest scents that made her dizzy after the copper stink of her own blood. He led her quickly past the stalls where horses watched with liquid dark eyes to a ladder that climbed up into the hayloft. She looked at it and then at her shaking hands, doubted she had the strength to climb. "I will be right behind you," he said quietly, as though reading her thoughts. "If you fall, I will catch you." She did not know why she believed him, this stranger whose name she did not even know, but she grasped the ladder and pulled herself up one rung at a time. Her muscles screamed, her feet left wet marks on the wood, and twice she nearly slipped. Both times she felt his hand steady at her back, not pushing, just there, solid as the earth. When she reached the top and collapsed into the sweet-smelling hay, he came up behind her quick as a cat, despite his size. "There is a space behind these bales," he said, already moving them aside with practiced efficiency. "It is not much, but it will keep you out of sight. Can you squeeze in there?" She crawled into the narrow space he had created, a tunnel of sorts between the hay bales and the barn wall. He handed her a blanket that had been draped over a beam, surprisingly clean, and a canteen of water. "Stay quiet no matter what you hear," he told her, his eyes serious in the dimness. "He will never find you, I give you my word." "You do not even know me," Deanna said, her voice cracking. "Why would you risk this?" The cowboy looked at her for a long moment, and she saw something old and sad move through his expression. "I know enough," he said simply. Then he was fitting the hay bales back into place, sealing her into darkness and safety, and she heard him descend the ladder. She pressed her face into the blanket and finally let herself cry, great silent sobs that shook her whole body. She did not know how long she stayed like that, lost in the grief of everything she had endured and the strange, fragile hope that maybe, just maybe, she might survive this. Eventually the tears stopped because there were none left, and she lay still in her hiding place, listening to the sounds of the barn below. The stamp of hooves, the rustle of hay, the low murmur of the cowboy's voice as he spoke to the animals. Normal sounds, safe sounds. The hoofbeats came perhaps an hour later, hard and fast and furious. Deanna went rigid, her heart hammering so hard she thought it might burst from her chest. She heard a horse pulled up short, heard boots hit the ground with a thump she knew too well. Thomas. Even through the wood and hay, she could feel his rage radiating like heat from a stove. "You there," Thomas called out, his voice carrying that edge of violence he wore like a coat. "You seen a woman come through here? Brown hair, medium height, wearing a blue dress." The cowboy's response was slow, measured, unimpressed. "Cannot say I have. You lose your wife, mister." "That is my business," Thomas snapped. "I am asking if you saw her, and I am telling you I have not." The cowboy's voice held no give in it, hard as iron. "This is private property. I am going to have to ask you to move along." There was a pause, thick with tension. Deanna held her breath, pressed one hand over her mouth to keep from making a sound. She could picture Thomas, red-faced and furious, trying to decide whether this stranger was lying. She knew how he got when someone defied him, the way his hands would curl into fists, the vein that pulsed in his temple. "Maybe I should look around," Thomas said, and she heard the threat in it. "Make sure you are telling me the truth. Maybe you should not." The cowboy's tone had not changed, but there was something underneath it now, something that suggested he was not a man who could be pushed. "Like I said, private property, and I do not take kindly to strangers calling me a liar." Another pause. Deanna imagined the two men staring at each other, weighing each other up the way men did. She prayed to a God she was not sure listened any more that Thomas would back down, would ride away, would believe the cowboy's words. "If I find out you are lying to me," Thomas said finally, low and mean, "I will be back, and you will regret it." "I am sure I am shaking in my boots," the cowboy replied, dry as dust. "Now get off my land before I make you." Deanna heard Thomas spit into the dirt, heard him mount up again with rough, angry movements. The hoofbeats retreated, growing fainter, until finally they were gone and there was nothing but the sound of her own ragged breathing. She stayed frozen in place, terrified that Thomas might circle back, that this was some kind of trick. After what felt like hours but was probably only minutes, she heard the ladder creak. The hay bales moved and the cowboy's face appeared in the gap, backlit by the dusty afternoon light. "He is gone," he said quietly. "You can breathe now." Deanna realized she had been holding her breath and let it out in a shaky rush. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you. I do not know what he would have done if he had found me here." "I can guess," the cowboy said grimly. He studied her for a moment, then seemed to make another decision. "My name is Daniel Kerrigan. This is my ranch, small as it is. You are welcome to stay as long as you need to. I will not ask your story unless you want to tell it." "Deanna," she said, because it seemed important that he know her name, that she be a person to him and not just a problem to solve. "Deanna Kellerman." "Well, Deanna Kellerman," Daniel said, and there was a gentleness in the way he spoke her name that made her throat tight. "Let us get you out of there and cleaned up. You are bleeding on my good hay." It was such an absurd thing to say, so unexpected, that Diana felt a laugh bubble up despite everything. It came out more like a sob, but there was real humor in it too, and she saw Daniel's mouth quirk in what might have been a smile. He helped her crawl out of the hiding space, and this time when he offered his hand, she took it. Her feet were in worse shape than she had realized, torn and swollen and streaked with dirt. Daniel took one look at them and shook his head. "Cannot have you walking on those. Come on." Before she could protest, he had scooped her up in his arms like she weighed nothing, cradling her against his chest as he carried her down the ladder. Deanna stiffened at first, old instincts screaming danger, but he held her carefully, the way one might hold something precious, and she found herself relaxing against him despite herself. He brought her not to the main house, which she could see through the barn door, a neat whitewashed structure with a porch, but to a small cabin set back among a stand of cottonwood trees. "My foreman's place," he explained as he pushed the door open with his boot. "He passed last winter, and I have not had the heart to hire someone new yet. It is not much, but it is private, and you will be safe here." The cabin was simple but clean, one main room with a bed in the corner, a small stove, a table and 2 chairs. Daniel set her down gently on the bed, then went to pump water into a basin. He brought it to her along with clean cloths and a bottle of something that smelled medicinal. "For your feet," he said. "It is going to hurt." "Everything already hurts," Deanna said quietly, and Daniel's jaw tightened. "I am sorry for that," he said. He knelt before her, which seemed wrong somehow, this man on his knees tending her wounds. She started to protest, but he was already cleaning the cuts with steady, practiced hands. He had been right about it hurting. Deanna bit her lip to keep from crying out as he worked the dirt and debris from the torn flesh, as he applied the stinging medicine, as he wrapped her feet in clean bandages torn from what looked like an old shirt. When he finished, he sat back on his heels and looked up at her. "I have stew from last night," he said, "and bread that is only a little stale. You should eat something." "I cannot take your food," Deanna protested weakly, but her stomach betrayed her with a loud growl. She could not remember the last time she had eaten. Yesterday morning, maybe, before Thomas had started drinking and everything had gone so wrong. "You can and you will," Daniel said firmly. He stood, went to the stove, and began dishing up a bowl of stew from the pot that sat there. The smell of it made Deanna's mouth water, rich beef and vegetables and something spiced. He handed her the bowl and a spoon, set a hunk of bread beside her, and then retreated to the table as though giving her space to eat in peace. Deanna ate like she was starving, because she was. The stew was good, better than anything she had made in the last year, and she realized with a pang that Thomas had criticized everything she cooked, told her she was worthless even at woman's work. She had started to believe him, had stopped trying, had simply put food on the table and endured his complaints. "This is wonderful," she said, glancing at Daniel. "Did you make it?" He shrugged, looking almost embarrassed. "A man learns to cook when he lives alone. Either that or starve." "You have no wife?" The question was out before Deanna could stop it, too personal, but Daniel did not seem offended. "No," he said simply. "Came close once, long time ago. She decided ranch life was not for her, moved back east to St. Louis. Cannot say I blame her. This is hard country for everyone, but especially for women." There was no bitterness in his voice, just a kind of resigned acceptance. Deanna finished her stew in silence, thinking about how different he was from Thomas, who blamed everyone but himself for everything that went wrong. When she was done, Daniel took the bowl without comment and set it aside. "You need rest," he said. "I will leave you be. Door locks from the inside, and I will be in the main house if you need anything. Tomorrow we can figure out what comes next." Deanna wanted to protest that she had already imposed too much, that she could not possibly stay, but exhaustion was pulling at her like a riptide. "Why are you helping me?" she asked instead, needing to understand. "You do not know me. I could be a criminal, a liar, anything." Daniel paused at the door, his hand on the frame. He looked back at her, and his eyes were sad again in that way that suggested old wounds. "My mother," he said quietly. She had a husband who used his fists too. I was too young to help her, too small to stop him. By the time I was big enough, she was already gone, so I guess you could say I am helping you for her. Does that make sense? Deanna felt tears prick her eyes again. Yes, she whispered. It makes perfect sense. Daniel nodded once, then stepped outside and pulled the door closed behind him. Deanna sat on the bed for a long moment, staring at the door, at the lock that would keep her safe. Then she turned the bolt with shaking hands, lay down on the clean sheets, and let herself drift into the first peaceful sleep she had known in 3 years. She woke to sunlight streaming through the cabin's small window and the sound of roosters crowing. For a moment she was disoriented, expecting to wake in her marriage bed with Thomas beside her, and panic flared. Then memory returned, the flight, the barn, Daniel's kind creek water eyes, and she sagged back against the pillow in relief. Her feet throbbed but hurt less than they had the night before. Deanna sat up carefully, testing them, and found she could put some weight on them, though it was far from comfortable. She looked down at her dress, stained and torn beyond repair, and felt a flush of shame. She had nothing else, no other clothes, no possessions at all except the wedding ring she still wore out of habit. A knock at the door made her freeze. "Deanna," Daniel's voice quiet and respectful. "I brought some things for you. I will leave them outside the door." She waited until she heard his footsteps retreat, then opened the door a crack. Outside on the step was a bundle of clothes, women's clothes, neatly folded. A simple brown skirt and white blouse, undergarments, even a pair of worn but serviceable boots that looked about her size. There was also a plate covered with a cloth, and when she lifted it, she found eggs and bacon and more of that good bread, still warm. Deanna carried everything inside and locked the door again. She changed out of her ruined dress with relief, though it felt strange to wear someone else's clothes. They fit reasonably well, if a little loose in places. The boots were snug but would work. She ate the breakfast gratefully, tasting care in every bite. When she was dressed and fed, Deanna unlocked the door and stepped outside. The morning was already hot, the Oklahoma sky that endless blue that made her think of freedom. She could see Daniel by the barn, working with a horse in a corral, patient and unhurried. He looked up when she emerged, and even from a distance she could see the relief on his face. She walked toward him slowly, favoring her wounded feet. He watched her come, made no move to rush her, and she appreciated that. When she reached the corral fence, she leaned against it and watched him work. The horse was a young bay mare, skittish and uncertain, and Daniel was teaching her to accept a saddle with gentle persistence. "The clothes fit," he observed after a moment. "That is good." "They were your mother's," Deanna guessed, and Daniel nodded. "I kept a few things," he said. "Never knew quite why. Guess maybe I was keeping them for a reason after all." They were quiet for a while, both watching the horse. Deanna had 1,000 questions, but she did not know how to ask any of them. What happened now? Could she truly stay here? What if Thomas came back? And underneath all of that, a question she barely dared acknowledge. Who was this man who had saved her life and asked for nothing in return? "I was married at 20, Deanna said suddenly, the words tumbling out. Thomas seemed like a good man. He owned a dry goods store in town, had a house, money saved. My father thought it was a fine match. For the first few months it was. Then he started drinking, and when he drank he got angry, and when he got angry—" She trailed off, could not make herself say the rest. "You do not have to tell me," Daniel said quietly, still working with the mare. "I think I do," Deanna said. "I think I need someone to know. Yesterday he came home drunk in the afternoon. I had burned the biscuits just a little, and he lost his temper. He hit me, which was not new, but then he picked up a knife from the table. He said he was tired of being married to a useless woman. He said he was going to kill me and find someone better. So I hit him with a cast iron pan and I ran. I do not know if he is badly hurt or just angry, but I know I cannot go back. If I go back, I am dead." Daniel stopped what he was doing and turned to face her fully. "Then you will not go back," he said, and it was not a suggestion but a statement of fact. "You will stay here until we figure something else out. You are safe on my land. I meant what I said yesterday. He will never find you." "You cannot protect me forever," Deanna said, but even as she said it, she realized she wanted him to argue with her. "Maybe not forever," Daniel agreed. "But for today and tomorrow, and as many days as it takes." He hesitated, then added, "There is a circuit judge who comes through Guthrie once a month. You could file for divorce on grounds of cruelty. It is rare, but it can be done, especially if there are witnesses to the abuse." "I have no witnesses," Deanna said bitterly. "Thomas made sure of that. We had no friends. He kept me away from my family. It was just the two of us in that house." "You have the marks on you," Daniel pointed out, "and you have me if you want. I will testify to what I saw yesterday, the state you were in when you arrived." Deanna stared at him. "You would do that? Stand up in front of everyone and get involved in this mess?" "I am already involved," Daniel said simply. "The moment I hid you in my barn, I chose a side. Might as well see it through." She did not know what to say to that, so she said nothing. They stood in companionable silence while Daniel finished his work with the mare, and Diana let herself imagine, just for a moment, what it might be like to stay here. To wake up to sunlight and roosters instead of Thomas's anger. To wear clothes that fit and eat food that tasted good. To be around a man who spoke gently and kept his hands to himself. It was a dangerous thing to imagine, and she pushed it away. Over the following days, Deanna settled into a routine that felt both strange and natural. Daniel had meant what he said about her staying, and he set her up properly in the foreman's cabin with everything she might need. He brought her books from his own small collection, asked if she knew how to sew because he had mending that needed doing if she wanted something to occupy her time. She said yes, grateful for the work, for something to do with her hands besides worry. She learned that Daniel ran his ranch mostly alone, a small operation with a dozen horses he raised and trained for sale, some cattle, a few pigs and chickens. It was not a wealthy spread by any means, but it was well kept and clearly cared for. He worked from dawn to dusk, and Deanna found herself watching him from the cabin window more than she should, noticing the way he moved with quiet competence, the way he never lost his patience even when things went wrong. On the third day, she ventured out to the chicken coop and started gathering eggs without being asked. Daniel found her there and grinned, that rare expression that transformed his serious face. "You do not have to do that," he said. "I know," Deanna replied, "but I want to help." "You have done so much for me. The least I can do is gather some eggs." "Well then," Daniel said, "if you are set on helping, I could use a hand in the vegetable garden. The weeds are getting away from me." So Deanna spent the afternoon on her knees in the dirt, pulling weeds while Daniel worked beside her, and they talked. Really talked, about small things and large ones. She learned he was 32, had inherited the ranch from his father 5 years back, loved horses more than people most days. He learned she was 23, had wanted to be a teacher before she got married, missed reading more than almost anything. "There is a schoolhouse in town," Daniel mentioned casually. "They are always looking for teachers, especially women teachers. Once things are settled if you wanted." He trailed off, but Deanna understood what he was offering. A future. A life beyond survival. It was almost too much to contemplate. That night, Daniel invited her to the main house for dinner, said he was tired of shouting across the yard to communicate. Deanna accepted nervously, not sure what to expect. The house was neat and masculine, sparse but comfortable, with a large fireplace and windows that let in the evening light. Daniel cooked steaks and potatoes, and they ate at his kitchen table like normal people, like friends. "Can I ask you something?" Deanna said after a while, emboldened by the wine Daniel had poured just a little from a bottle he said he saved for special occasions. "Anything," Daniel said. "Why do you live out here alone? You could have any woman you wanted. You are kind and good-looking and you own your own land, but you choose to be by yourself." Daniel looked into his wine glass, swirling the red liquid thoughtfully. "I told you about Eliza, the woman who went back east. What I did not tell you is that after her, I realized something. I could have a wife if I wanted one, but I did not want just any wife. I wanted a partner, someone who would see this life the way I see it, who would want to build something together instead of just enduring. That kind of woman is rare. So I decided I would rather be alone than settle for less than that." He looked up, met her eyes. "Does that make sense, or do I sound like a fool?" "It makes perfect sense," Deanna said softly. "I wish I had been that wise. I settled for Thomas because everyone said I should, because I was 20 and unmarried, and my father acted like I was becoming a burden. I did not love him, but I thought maybe I could learn to. I thought marriage was supposed to be about partnership too, but Thomas just wanted someone to cook and clean and never talk back." "That is not partnership," Daniel said. "That is ownership, and you are not something to be owned." Deanna felt something shift in her chest, some tight knot of shame and fear beginning to loosen. "I am starting to believe that," she said. The days turned into a week, then two. Thomas did not return, though Deanna jumped at every unexpected sound, could not quite convince herself she was truly safe. Daniel was patient with her fear, never pushed her, never made her feel foolish for being scared. He showed her how to shoot his rifle, said every woman on the frontier should know how to protect herself. Deanna had never held a gun before, but she learned quickly, found a grim satisfaction in the way the targets exploded when she hit them. She also took over the cooking, insisted on it really, because it felt good to make meals for someone who appreciated them. Daniel praised everything she made, even the things that did not turn out quite right, and Deanna realized she had forgotten what it felt like to do something well. Under his quiet encouragement, she started experimenting, trying recipes she remembered from before her marriage, and the kitchen became a place of joy instead of anxiety. They fell into patterns, rhythms of work and rest. Daniel taught her about horses, let her help with the training. Deanna had always been a little afraid of the big animals, but under his guidance, she learned to read their moods, to approach them with confidence. There was a young gelding, gray as smoke, who took a particular liking to her, and Daniel laughed when the horse followed her around the corral like a puppy. "I think he is yours now," Daniel said, grinning. "Smokey seems to have decided." "I cannot take your horse," Deanna protested, but she was stroking Smokey's nose and the gelding was leaning into her touch with obvious contentment. "He is not much use if he will not work for anyone but you," Daniel pointed out reasonably. "Besides, every woman should have her own horse. Means freedom, mobility. Means if you ever need to run again, you can run faster." Deanna felt her throat tighten at his thoughtfulness. "Thank you," she whispered, "for everything, for all of this." Daniel stepped closer, and for a moment Deanna thought he might touch her, might reach out and take her hand. Her heart hammered, but not with fear, with something else entirely. But then he seemed to think better of it and stepped back, shoving his hands in his pockets. "You do not have to thank me," he said gruffly. "This is just being decent." "No," Deanna said firmly. "It is more than that. Most men would not have risked what you risked, would not have cared." "Then most men are fools," Daniel said, and there was something in his voice, something fierce and tender at once, that made Deanna's breath catch. That night, lying in her bed in the foreman's cabin, Deanna admitted to herself what she had been trying to deny for days. She was falling in love with Daniel Kerrigan. It was foolish and impossible and terrifying, but it was also undeniably true. She loved the way he talked to his horses, the way he squinted at the sky to read the weather, the way he never raised his voice even when things went wrong. She loved his quiet strength, his gentle hands, the rare smiles that lit up his serious face. But she was still married, still legally bound to Thomas, and even if she were free, what right did she have to burden Daniel with her broken self? He deserved someone whole, someone who did not flinch at sudden movements, someone who could give him the partnership he wanted without all the damaged pieces she carried. The thought made her want to cry, but she was done crying. Instead, she stared at the ceiling and made herself a promise. She would get the divorce. She would become independent, learn to stand on her own. And if, after all that, Daniel still looked at her the way he sometimes did when he thought she was not watching, then maybe, just maybe, she would let herself believe in something good again. The circuit judge came to Guthrie 3 weeks after Deanna's arrival at the ranch. Daniel drove her into town in his wagon, and Deanna wore her best dress, which was really the only dress she had besides the one she had arrived in. She was terrified, convinced she would see Thomas, that he would drag her back or hurt Daniel or cause some terrible scene. But Thomas was not there. Deanna filed her petition for divorce with the county clerk, and Daniel stood beside her and gave his statement to the judge about the condition she had been in when she arrived at his ranch. The judge, an older man with kind eyes, listened carefully and asked Deanna questions about her marriage, about the abuse, and she answered as honestly as she could even though shame burned in her cheeks. "Mrs. Kellerman," the judge said when she was done, "I am granting a provisional divorce on grounds of cruelty and abandonment. Your husband will be notified and given a chance to contest, but given what you have told me and the evidence of your injuries, I do not anticipate any issues. You will be a free woman in 6 months' time once the waiting period is complete." 6 months. It felt like forever and no time at all. Deanna thanked the judge with a shaking voice, and Daniel guided her back to the wagon with a steady hand at her elbow. "Are you all right?" he asked when they were clear of the courthouse. "I do not know," Deanna admitted. "I thought I would feel relieved, but I just feel scared. What if Thomas contests? What if he comes for me?" "Then we deal with it," Daniel said firmly. "But Deanna, you need to know something. I asked around while we were in town. Thomas left Guthrie a week after you disappeared, sold his store, packed up, and moved on. No one knows where he went. Sounds like he was in debt, owed money to some dangerous people. Maybe he figured a wife was more trouble than she was worth compared to his other problems." Deanna processed this information slowly. Thomas was gone. He had given up on finding her, or maybe he had never really cared enough to try very hard. It should have hurt, should have felt like some final rejection, but instead she just felt numb. "So I ran from him," she said slowly, "and he just left." "You saved yourself," Daniel corrected gently. "That is what matters. He is gone and you are here and you are going to be fine." Deanna wanted to believe him. She was trying so hard to believe him. They did not go straight back to the ranch. Daniel drove them to a small restaurant, said they should celebrate her freedom even if it was not official yet. Over roast chicken and potatoes, Deanna found herself laughing at one of Daniel's stories about a horse that had once chased him up a tree, and it felt strange and wonderful to laugh, to feel something besides fear. "I have been thinking," Daniel said as they finished their meal. "The schoolhouse really is looking for a teacher. I mentioned you to the school board chairman, told him you were qualified. He said if you were interested, you could start in the fall when the new term begins." Deanna stared at him. "You did that? Why?" "Because you said you wanted to teach," Daniel said, as though it were obvious. "And because you should get to do what you want with your life. You have spent too long doing what other people wanted." "I have no teaching certificate," Deanna pointed out, but her heart was beating fast with possibility. "They do not care much about that out here," Daniel said with a shrug. "They care that you can read and write and cipher. You can do all that and more. Will you think about it at least?" "Yes," Deanna said, feeling something like hope unfurl in her chest. "Yes, I will think about it." Summer deepened into August, and the Oklahoma heat became oppressive. Deanna and Daniel worked in the early mornings and late evenings, resting during the worst of the midday sun. Deanna had taken over most of the household tasks without discussion, and Daniel had started consulting her about the ranch, asking her opinion on which horses to sell, whether they should expand the vegetable garden, small things that made her feel valued. They were dancing around each other, Deanna knew, circling closer but never quite touching. Sometimes she would catch Daniel watching her with an expression that made her skin warm, and sometimes he would catch her doing the same. But neither of them said anything, and the tension built like a thunderstorm waiting to break. One evening in late August, Diana was preparing dinner when Daniel came in from the fields earlier than usual. She looked up from the chicken she was frying and felt her breath catch. He had clearly been working hard, his shirt sweat-stained and clinging to him, his hair damp and curling slightly. He looked tired but content, and when he smiled at her, Diana felt her heart do something complicated in her chest. "Smells good," Daniel said, moving to wash his hands at the pump. "It will be ready soon," Deanna said, trying to keep her voice steady. "There is cold tea in the pitcher if you want some." Daniel poured himself a glass and leaned against the counter, watching her work. The silence between them felt charged, electric. Deanna focused on the chicken, on turning it at just the right moment, but she was intensely aware of his presence, of the small space between them. "Deanna," Daniel said finally, his voice low. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course," she said, not looking up. "You plan to stay? After the divorce is final, after you are free to go wherever you want? Will you stay here, or will you move on?" Diana's hands stilled. It was the question she had been asking herself for weeks, the one she was afraid to answer. "I do not know," she said honestly. "I have been teaching myself not to plan too far ahead, to just take things one day at a time." "That is a good way to live," Daniel said. "But I need to know. I need to know if I should." He trailed off, and when Deanna finally looked at him, he was staring into his tea like it held answers. "Should what?" she prompted softly. Daniel set down his glass and met her eyes. "I need to know if I should guard my heart or let it go where it wants to go." The words hung between them, honest and vulnerable. Deanna felt her pulse racing, felt the fear and the hope warring inside her. "Daniel," she whispered. "I am in love with you," he said simply. "I have been for weeks now, maybe since the first day you walked into that clearing looking like you were ready to fight the world despite being scared out of your mind. I know it is too soon. I know you are not free yet. I know you have been through hell and probably do not want or need a man complicating things. But I had to tell you. I had to be honest." Deanna stood frozen, the spatula still in her hand, staring at this good man who had saved her life and asked for nothing and was now offering her his heart. "I am broken," she said, the words ripping out of her. "I am damaged and scared, and I do not know if I remember how to love someone properly." "You deserve better than that. You deserve someone whole." "You are not broken," Daniel said fiercely, crossing the kitchen in 2 strides until he was standing right in front of her. He did not touch her, but she could feel the heat of him, the intensity of his presence. "You are hurt, and that is not the same thing. You survived, Deanna. You escaped and you healed and you learned to laugh again. That is not broken, that is strong as hell." "I am afraid," Deanna whispered. "I am so afraid of this, of you, of what I feel." "What do you feel?" Daniel asked gently. Deanna took a shaking breath and made herself say it. "I love you too. I love you, and it terrifies me because the last time I loved someone, or thought I did, it turned into a nightmare. What if I am wrong again? What if this is just gratitude or dependency or something else I am confusing for love?" "Then we will figure it out together," Daniel said. "But Deanna, this feels real to me, more real than anything I have felt before, and I think it feels real to you too." Diana closed her eyes, and when she opened them again, she made her choice. She set down the spatula and reached up, touching Daniel's face with tentative fingers. He went very still, letting her explore at her own pace, and she traced the line of his jaw, the curve of his cheekbone, the rough stubble she had watched him shave every morning. "I want to try," she said softly. "I want to believe in this, in us." Daniel let out a breath like a prayer answered. "We will go slow," he promised. "As slow as you need. I am not going anywhere." Deanna nodded, and then, gathering all her courage, she leaned up and kissed him. It was brief and chaste, just a brush of lips, but it felt like jumping off a cliff into unknown water. Daniel made a sound low in his throat but did not deepen the kiss, did not grab her or push for more. He just kissed her back gently and then rested his forehead against hers. "That was nice," he murmured, and Deanna laughed, the sound startled out of her. "Yes," she agreed. "It was." They stood like that for a long moment, just breathing together, and Diana felt something settle in her chest. This was right. This was real, and she was going to let herself have it. The chicken burned, and they laughed about it as they ate sandwiches instead. They talked late into the night about everything and nothing, and when Deanna finally went back to the foreman's cabin, Daniel walked her there and kissed her good night on the porch, still gentle, still careful. "Sleep well," he said. "You too," Deanna replied, and she went inside smiling. The next weeks were a revelation. Daniel courted her properly, which seemed absurd given that they lived on the same property and saw each other constantly, but he did it anyway. He picked wildflowers and left them on her doorstep. He planned a picnic by the creek that ran through his property and spent the whole afternoon making her laugh with stories from his childhood. He held her hand as they walked in the evenings and kissed her good night like she was something precious. Deanna bloomed under his attention like a plant given water after a drought. She started to relax, to believe that this was truly happening, that she could have this happiness. Her nightmares about Thomas became less frequent, and the instinct to flinch when someone moved too fast began to fade. She caught herself singing while she worked, something she had not done in years. In September, Diana started teaching at the Guthrie schoolhouse. It was everything she had hoped for and more. The children were eager to learn, and Diana found she had a gift for reaching them, for making lessons interesting. The school board was pleased, and Diana felt pride for the first time in years, not in being someone's wife but in being herself, in doing something that mattered. Daniel came to pick her up after school most days, and the children teased her about her handsome cowboy beau. Deanna blushed and laughed and did not deny it. October brought cooler weather and the first hints of autumn. Daniel took Deanna riding through his land, showing her the places he loved, the hidden meadows and rocky overlooks. They raced their horses across open fields, and Deanna felt the pure joy of speed and freedom, felt her hair streaming behind her and the sun on her face. They stopped on a hilltop overlooking the ranch, and Daniel helped her down from Smokey's back. They stood together, looking out over the rolling Oklahoma landscape, and Daniel slipped his arm around her waist. Deanna leaned into him, comfortable now with his touch in a way she would not have believed possible 6 months ago. "I want to show you something," Daniel said. He led her to a flat spot where an old foundation was visible, stones arranged in a rectangle. "My father started building a bigger house here before he died. He wanted something grand, something to pass down through generations. But he ran out of money and time, and I never saw the point of finishing it just for myself." Diana looked at the foundation, then at Daniel. "Why are you showing me this?" Daniel took both her hands in his, and his expression was serious and hopeful at once. "Because I want to finish it. I want to build that house and fill it with a family and make all those dreams my father had come true. And I want to do it with you if you will have me." Deanna's breath caught. "Daniel, are you?" "I am asking you to marry me," Daniel said simply. "I know you are not divorced yet, I know we have to wait, but when you are free, when you are ready, I want you to be my wife. I want to build a life with you, a real partnership like we talked about. I want to give you all the good things you deserve and never ask you to be less than you are. Will you marry me, Deanna?" Deanna felt tears streaming down her face, but they were good tears, joyful tears. "Yes," she said, her voice breaking. "Yes, I will marry you. I want all of that, everything you just said." Daniel swept her into his arms and spun her around, both of them laughing like children. When he set her down, he kissed her thoroughly, deeply, and Deanna kissed him back with all the love and hope and gratitude in her heart. "I love you," she said against his lips. "I love you so much." "I love you too," Daniel replied. "My brave, brilliant Deanna, you made me believe in love again." "You saved my life," Deanna said. "You saved mine right back," Daniel countered, and Deanna thought maybe they were both right. The divorce was finalized in early December, 6 months after Deanna had filed the papers. She and Daniel went to the courthouse together, and when the judge declared her officially free of Thomas Kellerman, Diana felt like she could finally breathe all the way. She walked out of that building no longer afraid, no longer running, no longer defined by the worst thing that had happened to her. They were married 2 weeks later, on a cold December morning with the justice of the peace officiating. Deanna wore a new dress, pale blue like the Oklahoma sky that Daniel had bought her in town. There were no guests besides the ranch hands from neighboring properties who had become friends, but Diana did not care. All that mattered was Daniel's hand in hers, the vows they spoke to each other, the rings they exchanged. "I take you as you are," Daniel said when it was his turn, and his voice was steady and sure. "I take all of you, the strength and the scars, the laughter and the fears. I promise to honor you, to partner with you, to build something beautiful together. I will never raise my hand to you except in kindness, never raise my voice to you except in laughter, never make you less than you are. This I swear." Deanna could barely speak through her tears when it was her turn. "I take you as my home," she said. "I take your kindness and your strength, your patience and your love. I promise to stand beside you, to work with you, to love you with everything I have. You gave me back my life, and I give you my heart freely and forever. This I swear." The justice pronounced them married, and Daniel kissed his wife while their friends cheered. Deanna clung to him and thought about the woman who had stumbled into a clearing 7 months ago, bleeding and terrified. She hardly recognized that version of herself, and yet she was grateful to her, that desperate woman who had chosen to run instead of surrender. They held a small celebration at the ranch, and Deanna laughed until her sides hurt and danced with her husband under the stars. When the guests finally left and they were alone, Daniel carried her over the threshold of the main house, which was officially their house now, not his but theirs. "Are you happy?" Daniel asked her as they stood together in their bedroom. "Happier than I ever thought I could be," Deanna said honestly. She looked up at her husband, this good man who had seen her at her lowest and chosen to love her anyway. "Thank you for hiding me in your barn that day. Thank you for trusting me enough to stay hidden," Daniel replied. He kissed her softly. "I will spend the rest of my life proving you made the right choice." "You already have," Deanna said, and she meant it with every fiber of her being. That winter, they began planning the new house on the hilltop, poring over sketches and discussing room layouts by lamplight. Deanna wanted a big kitchen with lots of windows, a library for all the books she intended to collect, bedrooms for the children they both hoped for. Daniel wanted a wide porch for watching sunsets, a solid foundation that would last generations, space for their family to grow. Spring came and they broke ground on the new house. Deanna continued teaching, and Daniel continued training horses, and together they built their life piece by piece. The house rose slowly, a project of love and care rather than speed. Daniel insisted on doing much of the work himself, and Deanna helped where she could, holding boards and mixing mortar and feeling pride in every beam they raised. In June, Diana discovered she was pregnant. She told Daniel one evening as they sat on the porch of the old house, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. He stared at her for a long moment, then let out a whoop of joy that probably carried to the next county. He picked her up and spun her carefully, his face alight with happiness. "A baby," he kept saying, wonderstruck. "We are going to have a baby." "We are," Deanna confirmed, laughing through happy tears. "Are you ready to be a father?" "I have no idea," Daniel admitted. "But I am going to do my best to be a good one. I am going to love our child the way my mother loved me, the way I should have been loved by both parents." "I know you will," Deanna said softly. "You are going to be wonderful." The pregnancy was healthy, and Deanna bloomed despite the summer heat. She had to stop teaching in August when she grew too large to comfortably stand all day. But she spent her time sewing baby clothes and preparing the nursery in the old house, since the new one was not finished yet. Daniel fussed over her constantly, worried about her overexerting herself, and Diana found his concern endearing rather than suffocating. In late October, as the leaves were turning gold and red, Diana went into labor. The local midwife came to help, and Daniel paced outside the bedroom like a caged animal, refusing to go far despite the midwife's assurance that everything was progressing normally. The labor was long and difficult, and there were moments when Deanna thought she could not do it. But then she would hear Daniel's voice through the door, encouraging her, believing in her, and she found the strength to push on. Their son was born just after dawn, squalling and red-faced and perfect. Deanna wept when the midwife placed him in her arms, overwhelmed by the love that crashed over her like a wave. Daniel was allowed in then, and he knelt beside the bed, staring at his son with tears streaming down his face. "He is beautiful," Daniel whispered, touching the baby's tiny hand with one careful finger. "He is perfect. You are perfect." "What should we name him?" Deanna asked. They had discussed names for months without deciding. But now, looking at their son, Daniel said, "James. For my father, who started building dreams even when things were hard. James Daniel Kerrigan." "James," Deanna repeated, and the name felt right. "Hello, James. Welcome to the world, little one." James was a good baby, healthy and strong, and Deanna marveled daily at the miracle of him. She had been so afraid during her pregnancy that she would not know how to be a mother, that her own trauma would somehow damage her child. But those fears melted away the first time James smiled at her. She loved him with a fierceness that surprised her, would have done anything to protect him, and she understood in a new way what Daniel had meant about saving people you loved. Daniel was a natural father, patient and gentle and utterly devoted. He sang to James in a surprisingly good voice, made up silly songs that made Deanna laugh. He walked the floor with the baby when James was fussy, never complaining about lost sleep. He involved James in his daily routines, carrying the baby in a sling while he did chores, talking to him about the horses and the ranch as though James could understand. The new house was completed in the spring of 1895, a full 2 years after Diana had fled to Daniel's barn. It was everything they had dreamed of, solid and spacious and filled with light. They moved in on a sunny May morning, and Diana stood in the kitchen she had designed and felt a contentment so deep it was almost painful. "You remember what you said to me that first day?" Deanna asked Daniel as they unpacked boxes together while James napped in his cradle. "When you hid me in the barn, I said he would never find you," Daniel recalled. "You kept that promise," Deanna said, "but you did more than that. You helped me find myself. You helped me become the woman I was always supposed to be." Daniel set down the box he was holding and crossed to her, pulling her into his arms. "You did that yourself," he said. "I just gave you a safe place to do it." "We gave each other that," Deanna corrected, and she kissed her husband, grateful for everything they had built together. Over the years that followed, their family grew. Deanna gave birth to twin daughters in 1897, auburn-haired and green-eyed like their mother. She named them Rose and Ruth, and they were hellions from the start, bold and adventurous and utterly fearless. James was a protective older brother, following his sisters around to make sure they did not get into too much trouble. Deanna continued teaching when she could, though she cut back her hours as the children grew. She started a small school on their property for the ranch children in the area, teaching reading and writing and arithmetic from her own home. Daniel expanded the ranch, breeding horses that became known throughout Oklahoma for their quality and temperament. They had hard times too. There were dry years when money was tight, years when Deanna miscarried and grieved for the children who would never be. There were arguments and disagreements, because no marriage was perfect, but they always talked through their problems and never let anger fester into something poisonous. On their 10th anniversary, Daniel took Deanna back to the hilltop where he had proposed. The house stood behind them now, full of the sounds of their children playing. They looked out over the land they had built together, and Daniel took her hand. "You ever regret it?" he asked. "Staying here, marrying me, choosing this life?" "Never," Deanna said firmly. "Not for a single moment. This is everything I never knew I wanted. Even with all the hard parts," Daniel pressed. "The work and the worry and the times when things were difficult, especially with those parts," Deanna said, "because we faced them together. Because you never once made me feel small or weak or less than enough. You made me your partner in every sense of the word." Daniel smiled and pulled her close. "You made me believe in love again," he said. "You made me believe in family and hope and second chances. I thank God every day that you stumbled into my clearing." "I thank God you were the one who found me," Deanna replied. They stood together watching the sunset, the same way they had done countless times before, and Diana thought about the journey that had brought her here. The terror and the pain of her first marriage felt distant now, old scars that had healed into something she could look at without flinching. She had learned that she was stronger than she knew, braver than she believed, capable of more than she had imagined. But mostly she had learned that love did not have to hurt, that a good man existed, a man who kept his promises and held her gently and built dreams with her instead of over her. She had learned that she deserved happiness, deserved respect, deserved a partnership where both people lifted each other up. The children called for them from the house, and Daniel and Deanna walked back together, hand in hand. Their family was waiting, their life was waiting, and Diana knew with absolute certainty that she was exactly where she was meant to be. Years later, when James was grown with children of his own, when Rose and Ruth had gone off to college in the East and made Deanna so proud she could burst, when Deanna and Daniel were older and grayer but no less in love, they would sit on their porch and tell stories about the old days. And sometimes Deanna would talk about the day she had run for her life, the day a cowboy had hidden her in his barn and promised she would be safe. "He never did find you," Daniel would say, the same words he had spoken decades before. "No," Deanna would agree, squeezing his weathered hand. "But I found everything I was looking for instead." And she meant it, every word of it, because the woman who had fled her abusive husband that hot July day in 1893 had not just survived. She had healed. She had loved. She had built a beautiful life from the ashes of her old one. And she had done it with a man who saw her worth even when she could not see it herself, who had given her shelter and safety and eventually so much more. Their love story was not the fairy tale Deanna had imagined as a girl. It was better than that. It was real, hard-won, and precious, built on trust and respect and the daily choice to choose each other over and over again. It was a love that had saved them both, that had created a family and a legacy that would outlast them. And it all started with a desperate woman, a kind cowboy, and the simple promise that she would never be found by the man who wanted to hurt her. Because she had been found instead by the man who would spend his life loving her exactly as she deserved to be loved, with gentleness and passion and unwavering devotion until their last breath.